I'm going to continue my commentary on this book right here. And you'll read in the Bible that Jesus went to the synagogues on a regular basis and he had arguments with the Pharisees and Sadducees. Well, if we think about it in today's terms, you would think, well, he probably went from church to church to church and he just had these arguments with the pastors. That's a little erroneous. The core of Jewish theology was this. If you had to make a sacrifice, you had to go to the Jewish temple to do it. You couldn't just do it wherever you wanted to. You had to actually go to the Jewish temple to do that kind of stuff. So all your major theological things that you had to do at the Jewish temple. Now, if you lived in Galilee, that was quite a trip. So you didn't make that trip that often. Basically, it was about 7 times a year. So then, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You know those 7 feasts that they speak about in the Bible? They were celebrated in Jerusalem. So you basically went to Jerusalem, you celebrated those feasts, and then you came back home. That was quite a trek. So, what about your weekly Sabbaths? Would you get up from Galilee once a week and travel all the way to Jerusalem on foot? No, you wouldn't. By the time you got back, you wouldn't have time to plant your crops or grow your crops or harvest your crops for that matter. You wouldn't do that. So you would go to your synagogue. Now, a synagogue is much like what we have as a church today. It's a house of prayer and a house of study. You're supposed to study the Torah and you're supposed to pray. That's how that works. Now then, in Jerusalem and the surrounding area of Jerusalem, you'll find synagogues. That's all fine and dandy. They were doing better off than what the Galileans were. What about the people in Galilee? They were peasants. They were being triple taxed. They could hardly afford to feed themselves. Right, they had the manpower and the resources to build such a building in every single Galilean village? Not hardly. Those synagogues out there were few and far between if you could find them at all. So what do? Well, there's been some theories on this. One theory says that they would find a prominent person in a particular village and occasionally turn his house into a synagogue for the day. Yet there's very little evidence to support that. So, what's the other theory? Well, the other theory is that all these Galilean villagers, or villages, the Galilean villages, would have a public square or a public gate. Now, the public gate would be a gate to get in and out of the Galilean village. And that would be turned into a synagogue-type environment. That's where you would have your prayers. That's where you do your study on a Sabbath day. Well, that was a lot closer than trying to travel all the way to Jerusalem or some remote synagogue somewhere in Galilee. And believe me, when you had to walk by foot or ride by some kind of a donkey or a mule, trust me, you wanted to be as close to a synagogue meeting place as you possibly could. So, when Jesus was arguing with the Pharisees and Sadducees, he was not arguing in a building, most likely. He was either arguing in a public square or he was arguing at the public gate. Because all of these Galilean villages had a public gate. So there you go. So, now that we've changed the picture a little bit, you kind of get an idea of where Jesus was when he argued his points. In my next video, I'm going to talk about how he would argue with Pharisees and Sadducees that really technically weren't supposed to be there in the first place. I'll tell you that in the next video, so stay tuned.